Hey guys, Solid here. I've got my nice hot cup of tea. I'm tucked away in the garage with my favorite bike in the world at the moment. I asked you to post all your most burning questions about the CRF300L. Let me tell you, you did not disappoint. Your enthusiasm was overwhelming. In fact, I apologize that I couldn't respond to all the questions. There were just too many to count. So I'm going to do my best. I've collated all the questions. I'm going to answer the most popular ones. And I'm also going to try and answer the questions I think are the most important that you need to know if you're thinking about getting this bike. So let's roll an intro, get into this giant rant fest and see whether this is the bike for you. The major question that popped out by far was, why didn't I go for a Rally? Well, there's three major reasons for that. The first was wheelbase. The L has a shorter wheelbase, a shorter rake, which means it's far more nimble and maneuverable on those tight off-road sections where I find myself doing a lot of riding. That is that single track, the goat trails, where you really need that nimbleness and that flickability in my eyes. So I need all the help I can get because of my lack of talent. So the L was the obvious choice. The second is the amount of plastics and stuff bolted onto the bike. The Rally has a whole lot more that can break if you drop it. And I drop my bike a lot because I really do push my minimal skill set off-road. So I wanted a bike that can really take being dropped a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times sometimes, off-road riding in a single day. The third thing is use case. This is an obvious one. I can see how a lot of people would think a Rally is very suited to my riding style, but that might be because you've been watching my channel recently. For the OG riders, you know that even though I don't have the greatest skills in the world, that doesn't stop me from really tackling quite technical terrain. I just do it very slowly. So 80% of my rides is about an hour to the off-road section. Then I spend about 7 a.m. to about 5 p.m. off-road on dirt roads, four-wheel drive tracks and goat trails. So that is most of my riding there. So a decent highway stint and then all day off-road. I'd say another 10% on top of that is camping trips, multi-day camping trips. And we try and work in as much off-road as possible. So we try and reduce the amount of highway kilometers or miles. And the final 10% is city riding. Traffic does get pretty bad and it's really great having a skinny, flickable little brat machine, and the L just suits that riding down to a T for me. Now that's not to say that the Rally's a bad bike. In fact, I think it's a fantastic bike and it wasn't an easy decision. Despite how confident I come across, it did cross my mind that the Rally could be quite good with its bigger tank and its better wind protection and a place to mount a sat nav if you wanted it. But those things I didn't really need. Now, if I was commuting to work and I needed a little more comfort and I was worried about fatigue on those longer rides, the Rally really starts to make sense. And if you aren't doing any single track, then really maybe the Rally is the way to go. But I need the skinniest, lightest weight and flickable, durable bike I can get my hands on. And the L is that bike for me. So that's why I chose the L over the Rally. So the second biggest question by a long mile was, how does it compare to the WR250R? Engine wise, peak power feels very similar. They feel very much the same when you're absolutely revving both of them and you're on the boil. If you're out of that peak power zone, as you know, on a WR250R, it really does lack a little bit of low-end tractor factor in that torque. The 300L compared to the 250R. Now the 300L, it's just a little bit stronger everywhere. It's not a world of difference, but the 300L just feels a little bit stronger everywhere. I think it's mostly due to its little bit of extra torque and the fact that that power comes a little early in the rev range. So it's a little quicker to overtake. It's much happier in the lower revs to tractor along. It's also a lot better, I've found, in just overtaking cars on the highway. It just has a little more grunt. So it's not massive. It's certainly not like going from a WR250R to a CRF300L or a DRZ400. It's just a little bit better in every aspect of riding. I think if you're looking for the more powerful bike, the L is going to have the slight edge to the WR250R. What about the suspension of both bikes? That's a very easy one to answer. The 250R has the far superior suspension because of all that adjustability, and it is more firm straight out of the gate. Now, That's not such a big criticism that it's a non-negotiable for me. It's always a great idea, in my opinion, to tune the suspension to the person. Now, obviously, the suspension on the 300L isn't very tunable except for preload, but I had budgeted to either completely do the internals or throw out the existing suspension and put on completely new shocks and springs. So the suspension is probably good enough to get me through the first 3 to 6 months anyway, while I wait for the major companies to come through. But yes, the 250R does have the superior suspension. Let's talk about weight differential of the 250R and the 300L. The WR250R wins here. It's 134 kilos, whereas I think this behind me is 142, maybe 144 kilos. I can't quite remember. Either way, it's 8 to 10 kilos heavier. In my day-to-day riding, I have not noticed at all. That was my experience with the 250L as well, which was even heavier than this, but somehow still felt just as light as the WR250R. So it must be something about the center of gravity or how the bike is designed. Will it make a difference once you drop the bike? I expect so. When my mate would drop his 250L, I did notice that 10 kilo difference there. It wasn't a big deal. They're both very easy bikes to pick up if you're a reasonably fit human being, but it is a little bit noticeable. So if weight is very, very important to you, then the 250R does have the slight edge in picking it up, but it really isn't noticeable in your day-to-day riding. The other thing that is probably the big reason I chose the L over the 250R is the fact that the 250R is now discontinued and the premium on second-hand WR250Rs is ridiculous. I got this cheaper than the very few WRs I've seen second-hand lately, and that was a big motivating factor on why I chose the 300L. The other thing with the L is it's just got the modern stuff. I love looking at it, and that is a big factor, if I'm being honest, in my off-road choices. The heart wants what the heart wants when it comes to motorcycles. So the next question is from Rob Kaczynski, or Rob Kaczynski, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Are you Polish, mate? I'd love to know. He said, would you tolerate one nuisance and one serious question? Sure, mate. So what and why is that large loop of hose line that stems from the right hand grip and frame of the dash? Must it be so? Well, you're probably referring to this ugly little thing popping up out of the dash here. That is the brake line, I believe, that is sticking out there. Can it be changed? I'm sure you could probably adjust it out of the way. I have seen a few videos. Perhaps even you could just change to braided lines and move it out of the way. So not a big deal, but that's what that is if you're wanting to know. The next part of Rob's question, he's asking about the seat height. Definitely, if you're looking for a bike and you're a shorter rider and you're wanting to get your feet on the ground as best you can, the 300L is going to be better than the 250R, the KLX, and the DRZ in my eyes. So 300L is definitely going to be the best short rider choice. So another question that popped up quite a bit in the comment section was, how the hell did I get the LED headlight set up? The reason is I live in Australia, and for some reason Australia are fine with the LED headlight setup. So hooray for me and boo for you, but better off that I win and you don't. So the next question is from Jay, and he's asking about the ABS. Is the ABS able to be turned off on both the front and the rear? No, it is not, Jay. So the ABS only turns off the rear. The next question is from Sami Nami, or Sami Nami, depending how you want to pronounce it. Thanks for the video. Cheers, mate. I'm super interested about the vibrations. How is it at 80 to 100 kilometers per hour? Is it too much for a very long ride? I don't think those vibes are too extreme. They are a little bit noticeable. I've been trying to pay attention to it. It does seem to go from very smooth down low to a little bit rougher in that mid-range, and then once you hit that peak power, it kind of maybe smooths out a little bit more as it hits that power band again, but it certainly isn't anything that I would complain about. So I'm not sure why people are bringing it up, but that's just my opinion. Maybe other people have bikes that vibrate more, but my 300L for the most part is fairly smooth. I have noticed a small amount of vibes in that, say, 4.5 to 6,000 RPM range, but I really am splitting hairs. So the next question is from Super Laplander, and he asked a few questions a lot of other people asked, but I'll just throw up this one for ease. He said, what rear rack to choose? That's a very good question, mate. I've been and ahhing about which one to go with. I think I'm going to wait a little while longer. I'm going to be patient, see if Skaggs comes out with a billet rack. If not, I'll probably go with a B&B off-road rack. So we'll see what happens. Fuel consumption at highway speeds, I haven't really paid attention exactly, but what I can tell you is this is the most fuel efficient dual sport I've ever owned. Fuel distance on average was something like 26.7 kilometers per litre, I believe, which is pretty damn good. My WR250R to compare was doing about 23 kilometers per litre. So it's very, very fuel efficient. I think I've figured it out that I roughly get to a tank of fuel on this, I'm getting about 225 to maybe 230 kilometers to a tank, which is pretty amazing. Honda, you really have done a good job on fuel consumption on this bike. How comfortable is the seat? It's not comfortable at all. It's a dual sport seat. It's like riding an arse-numbing hate plank of a thing. You could pretty much put a 2x4 on there and I'm pretty sure you would not notice a difference. Is it the same as the 250L? Yep, I think it's identical in seat comfort to the 250L. Nothing has changed there, so don't expect any more or less comfort than a 250L. It's comparable to the DRZ, the WR, the DR650, the KLR 650, at least the older ones. If you've ridden any other dual sport, you know exactly what you're going to get. A painful and numb butt after about 20 minutes of riding. It's just a fact of life. How does the suspension feel to the KLX 250 or the 300? That's what Dustin is asking. KLX suspension, I've only ridden the 250, obviously not the 300 because they don't sell the 300 here in Australia. But yes, the Kawasaki suspension is better than the Hondas out of the box. It's a little more firm and it's also got a little more adjustability if my memory serves me right. The next question is from Ed R, and he's saying, I've got some questions for your review. One, there have been complaints globally of more than usual hot air from the right radiator warming the right leg. I'm not sure if it's the right radiator or just the engine heat is more on the 300 than the 250L, but yes, I have noticed that. Is it too much? It hasn't been yet, but then I haven't been on any very super long rides. It's also pretty much winter here in Australia, so we've got fairly cold weather. But it has been something I have noticed when I'm doing city riding. I've just got a pair of Kevlar jeans and some riding shoes on. Yes, I have noticed the heat. Is it unbearable? Certainly not. It's nowhere near as bad as some other bikes I've had, particularly big engine bikes, but it is a noticeable increase over the 250L. And I can't tell you whether it's something that gets unbearable over time in hot weather because I have not experienced that yet. But yes, I can speak to there is an increased heat level on the right leg compared to the 250L. The second part of your question is, how do you like the stock gearing for on-road and off-road? Well, I haven't got off-road yet, but I've done off-road enough to know gearing that I like, regardless of if I've been to the off-road sections yet or not. And I think that this bike straight off the shop is probably one of the best bikes I've ever ridden for that compromise between on and off road. The first to 5 gears are actually quite close ratio, which is what I want. I really want a low first gear with a happy medium between second and third. So I've got that real adjustability for the tight trails riding, and then I can sit in fourth or fifth on the dirt roads. This gearing really lends itself to that. And then 6th gear on this bike really is an overdrive. So I wouldn't engage 6th gear until you're doing at least 80. And it will do upwards of 125 kilometers an hour without too much stress. It really is geared quite high. You actually run out of motor performance before you run out of gearing on this bike for 6th gear. So I think it's probably the best geared bike I've ever owned straight out of the shop. So the next question is from Phil, and he's asking me, how does this bike do on the highway and long rides? If you have no illusions about what a small displacement dual sport can offer you, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. If you're a dreamer that owns an adventure bike and thinks that the 300L is going to be as good as your parallel twin, you're going to be sadly disappointed. But if you've ridden a KLX 250, a WR 250R, CRF 300L, or even a DRZ 400E or a 400S, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Obviously, it can't match the power of the DRZ, but I think as far as highway comfort goes and how it feels competently sitting at those speeds, the 300L has all of those bikes beat. Not by a large margin, but it is noticeable. So I think this is the best small displacement dual sport for highway speeds that we've seen. It might seem a bit like hyperbole to you, but that's how I feel about it. I have done multiple highway stints now, so I feel very confident in saying that this is going to be a pretty decent bike. I'm kind of getting to the edge of my voice. It's starting to run out. So last question is from Ben D. What made you pick up the CRF300L over some of the other options like the KLX300? Well, the KLX300 isn't sold here because it doesn't have ABS, as stupid laws mean that they can't sell it here until that bike has ABS. So I just didn't have the option of looking at the 300. The 250S is just, it doesn't have a strong enough motor for me to consider, so I discounted it straight away. I have ridden one in the past, so I didn't really want that. Basically, I have nothing against SWM. They're a very good bike for the price, especially when you're trying to bridge that gap between a full-on enduro bike and a dual sport, considering that that was a full-on enduro bike only 10 years ago. The problem I have with SWM is there is only 2 dealerships here in Western Australia that sell the bikes, and they don't sell the full range, and they're very questionable and little dinky dealerships that I'm worried with the economic climate that we're in at the moment might not be around for a while. The other thing is the SWM really isn't good as my #1 off-road bike, and I don't think the gearing is quite set up for my needs to be able to do an hour or two of sustained 100 to 110 kilometers an hour to get to the off-road trail, because I usually don't finish up in the same spot I start off-road on my trails. I'm not the trailer and do a loop kind of guy. I'm the guy that gets up at Sparrow Fart, rides until the sun starts going down, and then commutes back home on the highway as far as I've got to go. So that's the kind of riding I do, and the SWM isn't suited to that. The reason I didn't go for a 250R is well documented on this channel. I had one for 5 years, and realistically, I just didn't want to go back over old territory. I wanted to experience something new. I also wanted to offer something new to the viewers as well. You've seen every kind of riding you can do on a 250R from me. The other thing is they're crazy expensive. Because they're discontinued here in Australia, the second-hand price of one of these is more expensive than a new L, and coupled with wanting that new experience, it really didn't make sense to spend more money on a second-hand bike. The DRZ is again the same category. It's a very competent and capable bike, but again, we only get the E model here in Australia. Now, I do own one, and it's a fantastic bike. I think it's the better trail bike because of that extra power, the better suspension. It's the better trail bike for sure. Is it a close comparison? I think with suspension, it would be a very hard thing to decide between both, but stock, the Z is better off-road. I'm rambling a bit, but the L just offers more modern features, what I like out of a bike. It has the ABS as well for the commuting, so it does a lot of things that the Z just can't compete with because it's such an old design. This is going to be a very good bike, and I think with suspension tweaks, this bike certainly is going to make an argument for itself in the future for the best small displacement dual sport, considering I've only had this bike for just over a week, so I really haven't battle tested it yet. But the feeling, the sense I get out of this bike, I've got quite a connection already. I'm really enjoying my experience so far, and that's not always the case with bikes I've owned. So I'm very excited for the future in this bike. Apologies if this was a long video, but I really wanted to answer as many of the burning questions you had, so hopefully this video has done that. So without further ado, I've been Solid. Don't forget to stay shiny side up, and I'll see you in the next one. Catch you later, guys.